Africa. 6. Just sit with that number for a second. Between 1961 and 1973 alone, 6 African independence leaders were assassinated. Now, this wasn't just a series of random, unconnected tragedies, right? It represents a highly concentrated period of destabilization. And it raises some massive questions about whether post-independence sovereignty on the continent was ever really a reality.
So let's jump into Section 1, the documented baseline, starting with the case of Patrice Lumumba.
To really grasp where this pattern begins, we have to look at Congo's first elected prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. Less than 7 months after his country gained independence, he was killed. And you know, for decades, the official story was, well, actually, it was intentionally clouded by a totally bogus pro-Soviet conspiracy plot that was deliberately disseminated by the CIA just to capture him. But contrast that covert narrative with the documented facts we have today. It took over 40 years, but in 2002, Belgium actually issued an official apology for its direct role in his execution. So this historical proof forms the foundation of what we're looking at today.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Cold War sweep, and a continent-wide pattern.
Because when we move beyond the Congo, we see this phenomenon spread, literally sweeping across the map at a rapid pace. Just look at this timeline. In 1963, we have Sylvanus Olympio in Togo. By 66, Kwame Nkrumah is deposed in Ghana. Then Tom Mboya in Kenya in 69, Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau in 73, and Murtala Muhammad in Nigeria in 76. I mean, in just over a decade, 5 visionary leaders met violent or forced ends.
And to understand exactly how these removals were orchestrated, we can zoom in on Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. The documented strategy here is chillingly coordinated. A 1964 U.S. State Department memo explicitly recommends psychological warfare to diminish his support. On top of that, a British Commonwealth Relations Office plan actually calls for a covert, unattributable attack. You add in clear CIA backing for his opposition, and you start to see this very deliberate, strategic alignment against his whole Pan-Africanist vision.
Let's move on to Section 3, Modern Echoes, featuring Sankara and Gaddafi.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that was just the Cold War. But these modern echoes are exactly why this history resonates so deeply and emotionally with younger Africans today. Take Thomas Sankara, right? Often called Africa's Che Guevara. He famously cut off IMF dependency in Burkina Faso. Officially, he was assassinated in 1987 in an internal coup led by his own deputy. However, there's a heavily contested counter-narrative across the continent arguing that this coup had deep French and CIA backing. The suspected motive? Protecting Western influence from his radical economic reforms.
Fast forward a bit to Libya in 2011. We have a leaked email from advisor Sidney Blumenthal to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and it explicitly states, quote, 143 tons of gold held by the Libyan central bank was to be used to create a pan-African currency, end quote. Gaddafi was incredibly ambitious here. He wanted to completely replace the French CFA franc with a Libyan gold dinar.
143 tons. To put that into perspective, that is more gold than the entire modern reserves of many developed nations today. It's a staggering economic motive. An African central bank backed by that much gold directly threatened Western economic control in Francophone Africa. And, as we know from the records, shortly after these plans became clear, Gaddafi was overthrown in a NATO-backed uprising.
And that leads us to Section 4, the overarching theory, economic imperialism.
So how do we synthesize decades of events, from Lumumba all the way to Gaddafi? If we impartially review the sources, a very striking matrix appears. Lumumba pursued national unity and Soviet ties, and faced Belgian and CIA intervention. Sankara tried to cut IMF dependency and faced suspected French and CIA pushback. Gaddafi planned a gold-backed currency and was toppled by NATO-backed forces. The sources strongly suggest that leaders who rejected Western dependency, sought to nationalize their resources, or tried to build Pan-African institutions routinely met violent or forced ends.
All of this points directly to the theory of economic imperialism. Basically, this is a situation where former colonial powers purportedly maintain economic control and actively destabilize nations just to deny them true independence. The overarching theory suggests that Western intelligence agencies essentially built and maintained a system to keep an economic stranglehold on these former colonies, long after formal decolonization took place.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we've reviewed the documented evidence, from official state apologies to leaked memos. And when we acknowledge the deeply held beliefs across the African continent today, it really forces us to look at the world differently. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought.
When independent economic models are crushed and Pan-African unity is continually derailed, who ultimately benefits from that destabilization? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep questioning, keep looking closely at the data, and I'll see you next time.